Hi there, this is Ron Rogers, and this video is titled USAF Instructor Pilot Tales, Fun Times with Simulator Instructors. And this goes over a little bit of history of the simulators used in the Air Force and the airlines, and my relationship with some of the simulator instructors. And some people who've dedicated their life to being a simulator instructor may not find this the most wonderful, but here are the tales. Now, if you want to talk simulators, I go back a long way. No, not quite to the Lynx simulator, but given the fact that I started flying in the 70s and these guys were from the 40s, I, at the time, was closer to these type of simulators than I was to the type of simulators we have now, which are much more improved. But okay, I'm out there as a T-37 instructor, and here's the typical setup on the simulators. We would take a student, we would put him in this fixed base simulator that essentially had the cockpit of a T-37, no visual, bolted to the ground, no motion, and you would actually fly it. They were reasonably good flying simulators, but the simulators back then were very old technology, and I'll show you some old pictures of how old this technology was. But we had two basic setups. We would have one, and we had dedicated sergeants, enlisted people in that, airmen and sergeants, who were simulator instructors. And being an instructor pilot, I got to know these people quite well. They would do a lot of the training. The actual instructor, the pilot instructor, would come in to do like emergency procedures, and that's what I typically did with students. And in there, I'd sit next to him, and I had this whole console down the side panel there, and we would be simulating emergencies in that, and I would go down there and click something, and then that would cause an overheat or a fire, or cause oil pressure to go to zero or something, and they would, have to go through the procedures. And every once in a while, yeah, I know, okay, I'm bad, I'm sorry, I would go down there and I'd just flick a switch that did nothing, and then watch the eyes scan around and wondering what the heck was going on. But that was usually if I had a really good student and it was going well and we were having a fun time. But I digress there. Okay, well, later the Air Force, they went through a lot of iterations on what they wanted to do, and they decided that, okay, instead of putting the people in the airplane and learning to fly, we were going to spend a lot of time in the simulator. And we were going to actually run these simulators around the clock. Oh my gosh. So I'm in there at 4 a.m. giving a simulator lesson. I say, oh, well, let's do a vertical S delta, which is a climbing 30-degree bank turn, 1,000 feet per minute. You go up 1,000 feet, then you come back down and you turn. They're vertical Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, I guess I remember. But the Delta was the most complex one. It's 4 a.m. I tell the student, okay, let's do a vertical S delta. And he sits there, he's doing it. And short time later, I hope it was only a short time later, I wake up. I had fallen asleep while I was doing the maneuver. And I said, well, that looks good. Okay, let's go on to something else. I hope he wasn't doing it for an extremely long period of time. But I did not like those simulators whatsoever. Now, this was a long time ago. I mean, this was back when we were training Iranian students, and I had several in my class. And the joke was we were only going to show them how to do barrel rolls to the left. So if things ever didn't go well with Iran, who would have thought? But if things ever didn't go well with Iran, we would and they got on our tail, we'd do a barrel roll to the right, and they wouldn't know what the heck that maneuver was because they had never seen it. Okay, digress. Back to the simulators. Okay, for those of you with engineering background, these puppies were all electromechanical analog. They had little motors that drove potentiometers that drove the instruments. And these things, I tell you, if you're an engineer, electrical engineer, or hobbyist or anything like that, you know the term spaghetti jungle, because these things were an absolute mess of wiring. Actually, it was pretty amazing that these things worked really as well as they did. I think we had very little trouble with them. But of course, now everything is much more sophisticated. they've got this virtual reality stuff, and I mean it's just amazing. When we wanted to do kind of a ground simulator, we took a plumber's helper. That's the plunger with the rubber thing in the background. We sat in a chair and we did chair flying with the plumber's helper, and we go, okay, throttle's idle, rudder launch neutral. If we were, trying to go through the mechanical aspects of doing a spin. So that was really crude. Hopefully, it's gotten a little bit better, and it actually has gotten a lot better. The more modern simulators the Air Force are using now are, I mean, they're very close to airline standards. But back in the day, I was down at Randolph Air Force Base. Okay, we're talking about mid 70s, and I'm going to be a T-37 instructor. Okay, so we're down there in training, and I'm learning to fly the T-37. But I'm also going through simulator instructor, and down there they had the enlisted simulator instructors. And because I was only going to be there for like 2 months, you had to find temporary housing. They had, and the local area was all set up for this. You had a 2 month lease. You had your little local housing there, and you were just out with normal people. Okay, normal people. But one of the guys in the apartment complex I was in was one of the airmen who was a simulator instructor, and we got to be kind of friends in that. And actually, I do another story where I took him down to the auger in there. We're all in civilian clothes, and he was kind of nervous about that because at the time it was an officers club, and it was enlisted and NCO, and all these clubs are separated, and you didn't go from one to the other. So he was a little nervous going in the auger in, but I said, hey, it's fine. I'll take care of things. It's fine. And we go in there, and of course, being a simulator instructor, guy starts to look at him. He says, gosh, you look familiar. And I can see my guy getting a little tense and stuff like that. And I said to the other guy, I said, do you fly 105s in Nam? And the guy says, no. And he says, well, that's not it then. Assuming that that's what this guy had done. So he was satiated on that and went away. But, okay, he's a simulator instructor, and, we get to be friends, have a few beers and stuff like that, and have a good time. And he makes the comment that, well, this flying stuff is easy to do, and I could do it too. And I said, well, you operate on a syllabus, and your thing is very structured. And I said, the real world isn't like that. And he goes, no, I could handle it. And he says, you give me a scenario and I'll handle it perfectly. And I said, okay, you're on. So, and we did actually have one in the syllabus where we were to give an instructional flight as a simulator instructor. So, okay, fine. So I put him in the seat, and it's, of course, being an instrument type of operation, which is basically what they took. We're doing an instrument departure, and it's, you take off, you get a heading, you intercept a radial, you go, you climb, you level off, and then you intercept another radial. So it's, and this is all single pilot, no autopilot. You're flying it, you're writing, you're navigating, you're doing everything. So you're busy. And of course, I picked a departure. I knew that he would get the intercept to the radial just as he leveled off, and there would be another radial he'd have to intercept. And once he did that, he starts the other intercept, and I said, stand by for a reroute. And he goes, what? And I said, yeah, this is something you get in real life. You get reroutes. We got an airspace conflict up there. So stand by for a reroute. And he goes, all right, whatever. So he starts writing down the reroute, and it wasn't overly complex reroute. It was fairly common, but the end of the story is basically he had a new appreciation for the type of things you get in the real world, because it's not canned. And that was my biggest complaint about some of these simulator instructors, is they were so used to everything being canned that it gave them a false sense of ability that that they could handle anything, because they handled these canned scenarios. But of course now in the Air Force, the simulators, I mean, they have motion now. They have visual. They can fly formation and everything like that. They're up there really equivalent to what you get at the airlines. Now, when I was this is a 787 simulator that my son arranged for me to fly after I had retired, and I found out I still hadn't turned into a decrepit cesspool of non-ability to fly. So it was kind of nice. But these are very sophisticated, but you still have the issue with the instructors flying the scenarios, the canned scenarios. They take a crew through this whole thing. Now, back at the time, the ACAR system, the system that you interfaced electronically with the outside world, was not well integrated into the simulators. So I had some of these instructors I knew, and I was a line check airman, and they were required to come out and fly on the line to keep their proficiency. Now we're talking, once every 2 months or something like that. I forget what it was, but they're not flying very often. And the real world is different than the simulator world because things don't always go as planned. And it was always kind of fun to get these guys because they'd come out with great confidence, and the real world environment could be challenging. So they said, "Hey, you're an instructor. We know you. We want to go fly with you." And I said, "Hey, that's great." And like I said, a lot of confidence. But we had the ACARS menus. Now they're set up now in the simulator, so you can go all through the stuff that you'd go through in a real flight and getting your CPDLC clearances and all this technical stuff that you do with electronics now, and where all the menus that are interlaced and stuff like that. But at the time, this wasn't well integrated into the simulators, so they would come out and they would start to get into this, and then they would start to get lost. And the overconfidence they had from going through a can scenario day after day after day, they started to see that have a little mercy on the guys you're instructing, because although you're used to it, the real world can be challenging, and it could be humbling for them to come out in the real world and see what the whole thing was about. But that's my tale about some of the issues you could get with simulator instructors, and sometimes they could get overconfidence because they flew can scenarios. So I hope you found it interesting, informative, and hopefully, if you're a simulator instructor, not offensive. Hey, thanks for watching.